again, good morning, everybody, and we want to welcome you to one of our most special parts of the meeting, and that is the presidential address. I'd like to invite Dr. Charles Stoller to the podium to introduce our president and begin this session.
Good morning, everybody. Those lights are blinding. So I apologize. First of all, I want to acknowledge Jessica's folly in asking me to do this. Anybody who puts me in front of a microphone is brave, because you never know what's coming next. So fair warning. The other is I have no PowerPoint slides. This is strictly text. And because when you reach my level of maturity, memory is somewhat odd. So I had to write down what I was going to say. So I apologize for that. But I will choose my words carefully, especially this being Florida. And I'll try to get not much more political than that. That being the case, I've listened to pretty much every presidential address and their introduction since 1976. And if you think this is an insular group, you should have been at the 1976 meeting in Acapulco, Florida. Talk about an old boys club. We've come a long way. The standard introduction is generally an irreverent archival documentation offered in an effort to humanize the president and deflate that person's ego. I'm not going to do that. I am, however, going to offer a couple of introductions from which a unifying concept will emerge, namely, you don't know Jessica. First, let me introduce you to Jessica's immediate family. Oh, James, you made it. Welcome. It's amazing. He was in the elevator or in the shower 5 minutes ago. Jessica actually has a husband of many years and 2 grown children. They're with us here today. Jessica married Alex Dill not long after the day I was sitting in her office as she was chatting with her mother, and I shouted from the background loud enough for Mrs. Candell to hear, "Don't worry, Mrs. Candell, one day Jessica will get married. Trust me." I think she got married 5 minutes later. I have no idea what Mrs. Candell's reaction was, but that was the last time I was ever allowed in Jessica's office. Alex is a very interesting guy who does stuff we can only pretend to understand. When I first met him, he was leading the risk management section of Moody's, the gold standard bond rating firm. I remember him telling me that in risk management, as opposed to what we do, risk management means, is it safe? No, that's what we do. Is it safe? In his world, it means, can we get away with it? As Jessica might say, Alex is the author of 2 highly regarded books with eye-catching titles such as, and I read them, Anti-Money Laundering Regulation and Compliance, as in how to get away with it. The second book is Bank Regulation, Risk Management, and Compliance, with introductions by the CEOs of Silicon Valley, Signature, and First Republic. You can get a signed copy for sale at the APSA Foundation. We'll do anything to raise money. Both of these books, by the way, have been banned in Florida. Jessica's 2 kids are here with us today as well. I've known both of them since infancy, having hosted their naps in the office many times. James Dill, stand up, James. I want you to know he actually exists. He just got out of the shower, as I said. James is graduating from Oberlin this year, having recently walked from the East Coast to the West Coast. I think he walked here from Ohio. You can sit down now. Having walked here from the East Coast, probably thinking he was Forrest Gump. Those of us with kids can only imagine what it's like to endure that remotely. If you have a chance to greet James and shake his hand, do it with your left hand. His right hand, honed by varsity tennis, will crush you. Anthea Dill. Anthea, please. Welcome, Anthea. Anthea is Jessica's daughter. She's a freshman at Tulane. Anthea is the free spirit that makes you wonder. Looking her up on Google, Instagram, YouTube, and other things I can't mention, and so forth, will stipulate to her free spirit and her influencer status. She's a budding entrepreneur, actually a successful entrepreneur, having taken her mother's Series A venture capital funds for a startup, having successfully arbitraged her fashionista radar into a successful business. I assume you're paying your own college tuition. Probably not. At this point, I'll share an unembellished story about my son, Jacob, that's relevant to this discussion. When my son was maybe about fourth grade or fifth grade, they had one of these dog and pony shows where they invite parents to parents' night. We've all been to these where they roll out the kids like like trick ponies, and they go around the room and ask the kids what they want to be when they grow up, and doctor, lawyer, fireman, whatever. And they get to my son Jacob, and they said, "Well, Jacob, what do you want to be when you grow up?" He says, "Well, I want to be a stranger." I said, "Well, that's a little unusual. What exactly is a stranger?" He says, "Well, it's somebody that goes to the hospital and never comes home." And, we could ha, 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 but that was like a dagger, and all of us in this room understand that. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce your mother to you, because you probably have no idea who she is. I'm guessing that you, probably relating to my son's musings and being aware of the time away from her home encumbered by our profession, you may not be fully aware of who your mother is in her professional world, so my remaining time is directed at the two of you. I'll continue by sharing some details you probably are aware of, but others may not. Jessica, for example, is a California girl. You didn't know that. She grew up in and around Hollywood. Her father was the author of multiple scripts for Sea Hunt, starring Lloyd Bridges, and some of us who remember what a black and white television looked like actually watched those shows. Jessica has no idea what a surfboard or a skateboard is. She graduated from Yale summa cum laude with a BA in medieval studies, the classic pre-med preparation. I dare you to ask her what that's all about. Her work at Port Moresby and Goroka-based hospitals in Papua New Guinea is evidenced by the penis gourds and pictures of their owners hanging on her wall in the office. Fair warning. Of more common note, your mother went to Columbia University for medical school, 1981 to 85, and it was in 1985 that I first met your mother. I remember her interest in Pearl Rottenberg, a young 10-year-old girl with familial polyposis. Pearl is now married with 4 children. And I remember she had all kinds of surgical stuff going on that we know something about. For some reason, your mother latched onto this young girl. And it was typical of her advocacy for kids that became so fulminant as it is today. She went on to Boston, which is a suburb of New York, for a general surgery residency. She went to Baltimore for pediatric surgery, another suburb of New York. I'm sort of imagining her trying to go toe-to-toe with Alex Haller. May he rest in peace. I can't imagine, knowing how dogmatic and stubborn your mother can be, and knowing something about Alex Haller, I can't imagine what that was like. In any case, your mother was appointed to our Department of Surgery in 1995. I'm not sure how that happened. At the time, it was just Peter Altman, Steve Stylianos, John Schulger, and me. I have no recollection of interviewing her or being asked for an opinion about her. She just appeared one day, and there she was, working with us. Having spent some time with Judith Folkman, she was a natural for investigative work in cancer biology. And over time, your mother became, among other things, the consummate surgeon scientist by every variation of the meaning. Your mother was the first woman to be awarded tenure in the Columbia University Department of Surgery. Your mother was one of only 2 surgical clinicians with R01 funding and continuous NIH funding since 1999. She's authored or co-authored 99 peer-reviewed original scientific reports. She knows a whole lot about VEGF, neuroblastoma, Wilms tumor, angiogenesis, vascular malformations, and so forth. She's been a mentor to many pediatric surgery fellows, and I think she's going to talk about mentoring in her speech. But many of those folks, the pediatric surgery fellows, the research fellows, the post-baccalaureate students, some of those folks are here today, and you know what I'm talking about. She's been an advocate for her professional family, not just in their careers, but also in their personal lives. Your mother's a great listener. You may find that hard to believe, but she really is a great listener. She's great at incorporating all sorts of perspectives into one rational thought. Your mom's also a superb pediatric surgeon and a surgical tactician who really gives a durable hoot about the kids and their families. She's an awesome children's advocate. But on a very personal level, your mom became a mentor to me. apologize. The leadership change from Peter Altman's transition in our hospital was very complex. There could be no question that without your mother's wise counsel and advocacy, the outcome would have been different. I'll spare you the details of the very turbulent relationship we had with the hospital, but I'm similarly confident that without her wise evidence-based counsel, the outcome would have been a mess. Any of us charged with leadership responsibilities for a division or department knows it's always something. The relationship with a hospital is one of mutual self-assured destruction. There is always some sort of kerfluffle erupting, usually related to faculty or hospital friction. Having your mother to test our thinking and maintain equipoise was priceless and to the benefit of all of us. Having been regaled with stories of your respective childhoods, we've been hearing about you forever. You may not realize that, but we've been hearing about you forever. I can only imagine how she brought these forces to bear in your home. I know she can be stubborn. I'm very aware of that, but only for a good reason. I've heard about some episode at some restaurant in Chicago where a water glass had a smudge of lipstick on it, and your mother went nuts, demanding to see the manager of the restaurant, who left that day looking for a new supply of stoma bags. I'm sure that's a true story, because I'll let you imagine the scene when your mother spotted another physician reusing the same site marking pen on several patients. That person is also looking for stoma bags, and Semmelweis rose up from his grave. Oh my, the past indeed is prologue. I can also tell you that our friendship that began when she was a medical student has only grown and bloomed. Since we both left Columbia, we seek each other's advice and counsel on substantial matters, both professional and personal. And to me, that's priceless. To be candid also, Columbia's loss was the University of Chicago's huge gain. For the last 2+ years, Jessica has invited me as the Zoom professor. On Tuesday mornings, I get to render opinions on patients for whom I have absolutely no responsibility, and to my shock and awe, they actually listen to me. I get to interact with her faculty and house staff, and I can tell you firsthand, she leads a crackerjack organization. She learned from the experiences at Columbia and organized a system of pediatric surgical services throughout the Chicago metropolitan area, and organized a system that incorporates both pediatric surgeons, advanced practice nurses, all matched with the best resources at each site. It's a durable construct. Each of her faculty, almost all of her whom are here today, each of her faculty in their own rights are stars and are made to shine by Jessica's leadership. Her fellow trainees are top drawer and much fun to interact with. They honor her by emulating her. She leads with rigor, evidence, compassion, and old-fashioned decency. She leads by example. These are exactly the qualities she has brought to her absent presidency in our professional family. Over the past few weeks, I've solicited comments regarding what her peers think of your mother. Here are some of the abstracted examples. Jessica is a boundary-spanning, thoughtful leader who works to hear all perspectives, especially in areas of controversy and conflict. She has a profound sense of humanity and leads from this foundation. I appreciate her direct, no BS approach. I remember her serendipity talk. Her greatness is not by serendipity. She actively aligns faculty with the resources needed to reach career goals. She just wants the sick children to get well. One of her faculty submitted a collection of Jessica-isms, some of which need attribution but are shorthand for her thought process. I'll give you some samples. Number one, oh well. This is used when an unavoidable conclusion is made by someone with whom she does not agree, often preceded by while plotting retaliation. Number two, happy to facilitate. In other words, fix it yourself. Or perhaps a feeding jejunostomy. This is usually in response to somebody proposing a Nissen fundoplication. The decision not to operate is usually incorrect. In all fairness, this was started by Peter Altman, but they say imitation is the greatest form of flattery. How about this one? Steady. This came from Steve Stylianos. Again, great mockery and imitation. Luncho abdomen. This came from all people, Arnie Salzberg, for some of us who know, passed on to Tom Tracy, who we all know, and by me. This is usually when a gastrostomy manages to put several liters of formula into the abdomen before somebody realizes something's not right. How about the best operation is not done fast? It's done only once. This actually came from Robert E. Gross and been passed on through many generations. How about this? The child is nauseated, not nauseous, often followed by barfing. She's an English major, medieval studies, remember? And this one of my favorites, volvulize is not a verb. Volvulus is a thing that twists. This came from Judd Randolph, from me to Jessica. I could go on, but I've used more than my allotted time. Nevertheless, I hope James, Alex, and Thea, fellow pediatric surgeons, physicians, assistants, advanced practice nurses, and guests, I hope my ramblings have introduced you to a real sense of your mother, your wife, my friend, and our president. Please welcome Jessica Kandel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stoller, and all of you. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today on a topic that has long interested me, mentorship, which I think of as a strategy for finding a way forward in pediatric surgery. I do not have any disclosures. One of the great privileges of working in the field of pediatric surgery is knowing that our work commits us to the future. A number of years ago, our pillars were developed, a visual representation of our strategic goals for the future: quality of care, access to care, a national healthcare agenda, organizational health, and equity and social justice were represented. These pillars are supported by inclusion, representation, and participation for all. I think that this structure has represented our aims well, and I feel tremendous pride when I think about all the work the membership of APSA has done in the interval since their development. However, when I looked again at these about a year ago, I realized that there was no pillar that adequately represented the commitment of our community to the development of new knowledge. I have to admit that I was part of the group that developed these, and I didn't even notice that omission at the time. Perhaps this happened because that inquiry, innovation, and discovery effort is so integral to our work. We assumed that it was somehow inherent in the aims that we did describe. I thought that this might be a moment to think about how we have fostered that commitment, which is so central to the best care of children. I believe that it should be a part of what we think about when we consider what might come next for the practice of children's general surgery. Committing to pediatric surgery also means a reach for the future, thinking about what comes next. If we do our jobs well today and are lucky, our patients will get better, grow up, forget all about us, and be part of advances that we can't imagine. If we are doing our jobs well today, we should be constantly figuring out how to do them better tomorrow, which is the heart and engine of the discovery effort that advances pediatric surgical care. So how can we shape what comes next? There are at least as many ways to frame an answer as there are pediatric surgeons. For example, it could be framed by a topic or area of inquiry. This is not even remotely a complete list. biomedical advances, technical innovation, education, information science, quality improvement, patient safety, ethics, advocacy, social determinants of child health, global engagement. The incredible variety in these areas of inquiry, all active right now within pediatric surgery and all present at this year's meeting, speaks to a culture that gives each of us a personal responsibility for working to leave this field better than we found it. But maybe we don't need to choose from a list. Perhaps this is an opportunity to think about the processes and practices that can surface and develop new ideas. What tools do we have to help us fulfill this obligation? Our field has an exceptionally rich tradition of mentorship, and we are very conscious of this feature. There are few surgical fields in which genealogy, the relationships between practitioners of different generations, is so celebrated and so treasured. I would propose that this is an important lever to pull in the big tasks ahead of us. And there are big tasks. But first, if we seek to take advantage of this tradition of mentorship in meeting our mission as pediatric surgeons, we should know what it is. So, what exactly is mentorship? If you begin to search for a definition, you will find that the word mentor is a term widely used in academic medicine, but for which there is no consensus and no operational definition. Without a definition, we have to somehow intuit what mentorship is and believe that it is important without knowing how exactly to define it, which makes it difficult to assess how well we are using this process or if we could do it better. So if there's no definition, how can we build a common understanding of what mentorship is supposed to be? Many sources will tell you what it is not. It's not teaching, and it's not coaching. But it's challenging to find an affirmative, consistent definition. So I tried to find clues to a common understanding in a couple of ways. First, where did this term originate? Going to a dictionary of etymology is a useful way to find out the history of a term. This word itself derives from the name of Mentor, who was a friend and advisor of Odysseus. Odysseus was one of the Greek warrior kings who went to fight against the city of Troy, as described in the Iliad and the Odyssey. When Odysseus left his home island of Ithaca for the Trojan War, he left his baby son, Telemachus, in the care of his wisest advisor, Mentor. Some writers have noted that Odysseus entrusted Telemachus to Mentor rather than to Odysseus's own father, the baby's grandfather, Laertes, who was alive and well. So Odysseus must have made this choice because Mentor had exceptional personal qualities, and yet he was not a great warrior, didn't have magical powers, wasn't partially divine, and wasn't rich, all of which were highly valued qualities in Homeric Greece. So what was so special about Mentor? Almost 20 years later, Odysseus had not returned. With involvement from the gods, Mentor and Telemachus decided to go on a voyage, with explicit and implicit goals for Telemachus, to seek news of Odysseus and to develop the vision of an adult. The Greeks of that era were sailors and had a number of terms for the ocean. Interestingly, this particular voyage is described as taking place on the open ocean, an unmapped space, potentially full of monsters, variable weather, and hidden reefs. In Homer's Greek, the word for this open ocean is different than the word for more familiar waters. You might truly need a mentor for this sort of open ocean exploration. The Greeks apparently found the idea of mentor in this role so useful that the word gained another meaning. Mentor came to mean one who thinks. So two aspects of mentorship that we can identify are not only the advisor and the guide, but the thinker. And because this is 2023, I did what many sixth graders do when faced with a complicated search question. I consulted ChatGPT, the AI bot, and requested a definition of a mentor as compared to a teacher or a coach. And I received what I think is a pretty good answer. A mentor can have qualities of both a teacher and a coach, but they are not the same thing. A teacher is someone who typically imparts knowledge. A coach, on the other hand, is typically someone who helps individuals to develop specific skills. A mentor, in contrast, provides insight, perspective, and help navigating professional or personal challenges. This seems to me like a reasonable place to start. So now that we are equipped with some ideas about what mentoring has been and can be, how should we think of this in our community? I would like to propose that our tradition of mentorship can be thought of as originating from very solid ground, our shared commitment to advancing the surgical care of children. That's why we are all here today. Each of us expects to go home having learned something we did not know before this meeting, either learned from a talk or as the result of conversation with colleagues. Starting from that place, it is not surprising that mentorship has been a particular strength of our field. We hand down this tradition as pediatric surgeons who advise, who think, who learn to help one another develop insight and perspective, and to help navigate the present with an eye to the future. How can we leverage this strength, this tradition in our community? Intentional mentoring can help us to navigate the open ocean in which we live and work, for which no maps exist. It can help us to address immediate obstacles, like rough weather, hidden reefs, or the externalities that disrupt our work and sometimes thwart our best initiatives. It can help us to define an authentic, longer-term direction, our individual contributions to a culture of inquiry. The first aspect of mentorship could be thought of as a way to help address the current state in which we find ourselves. The events of the last few years have stressed our community and our patients greatly. The pandemic, political and social discord, economic disruptions and bank failures, the war in Ukraine, the unsettled natural world, storms, fires, floods, earthquakes, climate change. It feels as if normal has been totally blown up. This cascade has affected what we do. Of course it has. How we live, work, and care for patients. Yet none of these stressors is new. Their impact is amplified by concurrence, the piling on of events. Many of these manifest within pediatric surgery and directly impact us and our patients. They are part of our immediate environment. For example, we've experienced a rising level of violence and acceptance of violence, societal discord around issues of gender and sex, the inescapable harms of racial inequity. I call your attention to this graph, which we have seen before during this meeting. Firearms-related injury became the leading cause of death in children in 2020. Looking at this graph was humbling to me because over the years I have spent more time thinking about other categories as subjects for study in pediatric surgery, such as malignant neoplasms, congenital anomalies, and appendicitis. 1 in 25 American 5-year-olds now won't live to see 40. Half of that is due to gun violence. I recently had the privilege of visiting our colleagues in Nashville 4 days after the mass shooting at the Covenant School and the death of 6 people, including 3 9-year-olds. The dedication and the grief in that children's hospital at Vanderbilt was palpable. If our goal is to address the most serious threats to children's health as children's surgeons, this issue calls out to us. The societal division around issues of gender and sex is deep and painful. During the last year, bomb threats were launched against children's hospitals in a violent escalation of the conflict around gender-affirming care. I found this unbelievable, truly shocking. In the before times, children's hospitals were treated almost with reverence as sites of unalloyed good, about as uncontroversial as sunlight or ice cream. How could someone imagine that it would be a good thing to threaten to bomb a building in which children are receiving chemotherapy or being supported in a NICU? How should we think about and address this discord, which echoes within our community and impacts our patients and their families? And amazingly, we are still dissecting the gravity of the harm exerted by racial inequities in medicine. This image demonstrates a tiny manifestation of this issue that is so woven into our healthcare system. It shows that babies born to parents in the highest income percentiles have lower mortality than those in the lowest, but that this apparent advantage is almost completely obviated by race. The babies of the richest Black families have higher infant mortality than the poorest white, Hispanic, and Asian babies. This is heartbreaking. The babies in whom we invest so much care and effort as pediatric surgeons are more likely to die if they are Black, even if their parents have all the advantages of high income. Like many of you, I cannot forget the face of this teenager, Ralph Yarl. Seeking to pick up his younger siblings, he rang the doorbell at the wrong house and was shot in the head. As he got up to run after being shot again, he heard his shooter yell, "Don't come around here." His assailant later acknowledged that he was motivated by Ralph's skin color. The wounded teenager then had to go to multiple homes seeking help before finding someone who would call the police. As we think about where pediatric surgery needs to go to provide better care for children, these issues are inescapable. They have to form part of the conversation about our reach for a better future, which has to include thinking about these terrible wounds in our society. Children deserve better. These issues lack easy resolution, but addressing them is required of us if we are to squarely face our obligation to improve care for children. The mentorship conversation is a setting in which such loaded and difficult issues can be considered. There is an enormous social cost to such concurrent stressors. Recognition of this is not new. A similar impact was experienced in the United States when the end of the First World War and its horrific casualties was closely followed by the widespread mortality of the Spanish flu. Warren G. Harding, who was at that time running for president, recognized this. In 1920, he made a speech hoping for return to normalcy. "There isn't anything the matter with world civilization," he said, "except that humanity is viewing it through a vision impaired in a cataclysmal war. Poise has been disturbed, and nerves have been racked, and fever has rendered men irrational." This was an astute set of observations. Harding went on to voice hopes for restoration, healing, serenity, and equipoise. Unfortunately, hoping for a return to the status quo ante didn't work. His presidency was racked by personal, political, and financial scandal. You can't get back to normal by wishing. And in truth, there probably never was a normal. The impact of the current state is non-trivial to each of us and all of us. Recovery is necessary if we are to be effective at our work, but it can't be a return to a mythical normal any more than we can wish our boat back into calmer waters. Perhaps we can imagine this boat in which we are traveling as being rocked by weather, tides, and other immediate obstacles. Mentorship, the intentional conversations that induce us to think and to harvest perspective, can help us to navigate. If we are to do our work in providing surgical care to children and advancing that care, we have to navigate, to grapple with these issues as urgent, because doing so is integral to the health of our patients. Mentorship can help us to navigate, in part, because these conversations feel exceptionally validating and genuine. Because it is focused on finding a way forward, this rich exchange of ideas can also help us to sustain mentors and mentees. It can help to rescue us from the demoralizing impact of externalities. The mentorship conversation reminds us of the reason that many of us enter medicine and our field, a marker of our commitment to the best surgical care of children and to the new knowledge that is needed to care for and ultimately cure our patients. This is a figure from a recent Nature article which sought to dissect a perceived epidemic of investigators opting out of some optional activities, tactfully referred to in the article as introducing boundaries. The report cited a poll of 1,700 researchers, of whom almost 70% cited burnout as the main reason for setting such limits in their work. I suspect that many of us have experienced this sense of exhaustion and discouragement. This reason, burnout, was reported as much more important than other powerful disincentives. In truth, this establishment of boundaries means withdrawing from involvement in the subjective work that adds tremendous value to the environment in which we work. but whose impact is difficult to measure and which is not explicitly rewarded. The article goes on to report that researchers at all career levels are ditching unpaid, unrecognized, or underappreciated tasks, such as conference participation, which of course is a pretty important setting for exchanging ideas, as we are all experiencing here. Committee memberships, ditto, and mentoring efforts. From the standpoint of a pediatric surgeon, one could view these as all the essential tasks which we know are important, but which lack easy metrics and are not assigned the dreaded work relative value units. Focusing on mentoring, here bundled with DEI work and outreach, both early career, the dark maroon bar, and the senior individuals, the blue bar, were found to have consciously dialed down their involvement. If the mentoring relationship is important to building what comes next in the world of investigation, that is troubling. Similar effects have been observed in other contexts. As one might predict from the concurrent stressors in healthcare, attrition in healthcare institutions has been significant during the last 3 years. In one study, the greatest increase in attrition for physicians came from the most senior individuals who retired at threefold the prior rate. This picture is worrisome for the loss of those very individuals who can be key contributors to the pool of experienced mentors. And it is worth noting that these individuals were not downsizing and not resigning to work somewhere else and not seeking some better situation. They retired. They were just done. Younger physicians have also been impacted. Early career physicians may not have had the out of retiring or leaving their institutions during the pandemic, in part because they couldn't. They were constrained by finances and perhaps by practices such as contract clawbacks and non-competes. Nonetheless, they cited multiple stressors pushing them to leave, including inadequate work-life balance and a desire to seek better opportunities. These are not new issues. Even before the pandemic, half of young physicians left health institutions within 8 years of hire, and more than half left within 10 years. One wonders if disengagement and departure of senior individuals are contributors to the present pattern of increased instability. Returning to our theme, how should we manage these issues within pediatric surgery? We are absolutely not immune to either the stressors or their impacts. Perhaps the mentorship conversation can be part of an intentional approach to retain the experienced and sustain the newest members of our field, to combat attrition. We've discussed this as a needed strategy to recover from near-term shocks. Let's turn attention to the role of mentorship in sustaining a culture of inquiry and fueling discovery. I would like to make the case that this bidirectional conversation can be a vital source of energy for both mentors and mentees. Mentorship in this context has been fairly extensively studied. The specific rewards for the mentor have been described and appear to be substantial. This is not an exhaustive list, but includes becoming more reflective, articulating core beliefs, experiencing pride from observing the mentee develop, caring more about the needs of the mentee than the needs of the organization. Similarly, the specific rewards for the mentee have been studied. And again, this is not an exhaustive or complete list, but includes help in defining and reaching towards goals, increasing self-confidence during a phase when individuals are acclimating to new roles, to increased responsibilities, and to new organizational cultures. Being challenged to go further, to take risks, to choose new directions. I believe that all of us would find these rewards exceptionally valuable. They remind us of one of the most joyful parts of our work. The nature of this relationship and the richness of the rewards help to explain why mentorship can play a critical role in supporting the work of discovery, the generation of new knowledge. The crucial task in this work is to help a mentee define a direction which is authentic to that person. What issue or problem calls out to them across that open ocean? The mentor has to learn to be non-directive in order to elicit that personal focus, which can be a big shift for the surgical personality. This is not an easy task. Encouraging someone else to recognize the problem that they feel charged personally to solve. Mentoring for discovery was the topic of a recent Nature Communications interview with 3 well-known scientific mentors. One of them, Tal Pupko, is a computational biologist who voiced his perspective. Mentoring is your way to provide means for your research students to grow up, both in science and at the personal level, so that they become better persons, better scientists, better everything. You want them to think more critically and to enjoy it along the way. It's also super important that you want to see the spark in their eyes. I find this a really insightful take on the mentor-mentee conversation. Given that it's tricky to define mentorship, which is so qualitative a relationship, how will we know if we are mentoring effectively? Some thinkers in this field have suggested metrics based on career success, variously defined as career trajectory, satisfaction, quality of life, research productivity, leadership positions. But all of these can be difficult to measure, and they don't necessarily capture our goal. We are chasing discovery, not career success, although we'd hope that achieving the first aim would entail the second. But despite the difficulty in identifying metrics, we should try, so that we have some idea if we are doing this work well. One approach could be to measure effects that matter in the context of specified groups. For example, it has been shown that mentoring as part of a comprehensive support effort can result in really good outcomes for young individuals from underrepresented groups in medicine, both in terms of career satisfaction and success as researchers. One such program, established to develop such individuals as investigators, was designed to include a strong, intentional mentoring component. When the program was later evaluated by the subjects, a significant increase in their research self-efficacy was observed. Their effective autonomy increased significantly. There was an impressive grant funding rate of 63%, and most of the individuals felt that their mentor was effective. They had been helped to develop the skills they needed to do their work. They had been provided with effective counseling. Similar results of intentional mentoring as a key to advancing investigation have been observed for other specified groups. This observation is robust and it's reproducible. In fact, the importance of mentoring is so recognized as a key driver of discovery that the NIH itself has been increasingly focused on this, both as a topic for research in itself and as an essential core resource for research centers. The number of grants funded that either study mentorship or specifically support mentoring as such a core resource has risen steadily over the past 20 years. And I want to mention that I'm citing the NIH not because I believe that mentorship specifically or exclusively applies to bench research or any of the other efforts funded by the NIH, but only because it's a very good source of data in this area. To stay on the topic of the NIH as a data resource, another specified group to analyze could be researchers applying for NIH funding. I suggest this group, again, because there's pretty good publicly available data to examine. Again, much of this supports the importance of mentorship for first-time grant recipients. So, what groups of grant recipients seem to be increasing over time? That is, for which individuals might mentorship be working? Let's start by looking at data for all grant applicants. Here is a graph that quantifies NIH grant success rate against the number of investigators over 25 years. Obviously, this is a pretty rough measure, and it is in no way representative of the variety and impact of the discovery effort in any field. But lacking a better measure, perhaps it's kind of a signpost for discovery in general. I find this a depressing graph. You can see that the number of applications over the past 20 years, represented by the vertical blue bars, has increased pretty steadily, while the rate of actually succeeding, which is the red line, has gone down. This might reflect constrained NIH budgets and increased competition for limited funds, but could clearly result in a larger group of discouraged young investigators. If we look specifically at the new investigators, the bottom dark blue line, their number has stayed pretty flat over the same length of time. Maybe some of them have graduated to more senior roles, but the total number has not increased. It looks like a zero-sum game for the very people who are going to be the future of research. While the trend is steady over many years, one wonders if the stress on the pool of senior mentors, with consequent discouragement in the group of mentees, is reading out in some way here. We would have to dissect the characteristics of these investigators further if we are to identify any positive trend. To do this, we can look specifically at NIH grants having something to do with pediatric surgery over the last 25 years. This is a very inexact representation and doesn't remotely capture all the questions we ask to advance care in pediatric surgery, or even all the basic research mechanisms or all the pediatric surgeons who are funded by NIH. However, over the long term, the trend is encouraging and looks positive, particularly when compared with the last two images. If I look at this with an optimistic lens, again over the long term, I see that there is something about pediatric surgery that continues to inspire us, and is effective in driving rigorous new research efforts that have met the high bar of NIH study sections and approval. At least in this snapshot, we can speculate that new people in our field have been asking questions in an effective way, and the current data around grant success suggests that mentoring is a big factor in making this happen. However, we might also be a little concerned that the stressors of recent years, shown by the downturn after 2019, are pushing on this optimism. As a counter to that downward dip, if we examine our current meeting, 371 abstracts were submitted for consideration, which means that an enormous proportion of our APSA community had something to transmit to the rest of us, and that is pretty amazing. Among the themes of our meeting that you might appreciate is a focus on the rising generation. Yesterday, you heard from a task force dedicated to understanding how the transition to practice is currently structured, with the ultimate goal of ensuring that those entering the field will have the best possible opportunities to succeed. One of the voiced needs of that group of transitioning pediatric surgeons was a desire for mentorship. Today, there are both established and new sessions dedicated to young investigators, such as the Grossfeld Scholars and the Young Investigators Symposium, whom you will hear from later today. To return to my original question, how should we move forward? Perhaps this is a moment to commit and recommit ourselves to mentoring with intention. Mentoring can provide a framework for two essential tasks that we face: discussion of difficult, nuanced, third-rail issues that infuse the context in which we work. This conversation is essential to the best care of our patients and to the recovery of our community. And the pursuit of discovery, which is the responsibility of all of us, because as pediatric surgeons, we are obligated to seek out and solve those issues that impede the best outcomes for our patients. Given the current environment, this is not a small task, but it is an essential one. I hope that I have made the case that mentoring can provide an extraordinary scaffold for our commitment to advancing children's health. This work is a critical part of our genealogy and our effort to shape the future. This is part of how we get there. I want to thank you all for your attention. It has been a tremendous honor and pleasure to serve as the president of this organization. There are too many people to thank for their help and advice throughout this year to name them all individually. Please accept my appreciation and gratitude. I do want to thank all the members who reached out to me personally, as your thoughts and messages and criticism were the most outstanding example of our shared commitment to APSA and to pediatric surgery. I do owe a special recognition to my family, who have listened to me with remarkable patience and love. Thank you all.